Welcome to the relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Another look at newly crowned WBA junior middleweight champion Israel Madrimov. The question, can he attract a big name at 154 pounds? He's with Matchroom.
So he's got some money behind him.
Last in action on the undercard of Anthony Joshua versus Francis Ngannou, his handler, Vadim Kornilov,
Also handles the career of Dmitry Bivol.
ahead of what was the Tim Tszyu versus Sebastian Fundora fight, he said, "I'll be watching closely for what the winner says they'll do next." Kornilov told BoxingScene.com on Thursday, "I don't think too many guys are in too big of a hurry to fight Madrimov." The 29-year-old Madrimov won his belt by a fifth-round stoppage of then-unbeaten Magomed Kurbanov on the March 8th undercard of Anthony Joshua versus Francis Ngannou. The healthy Madrimov is now poised to offer a chance to any noteworthy fighter at or around these weights a chance to fight for the WBA title. "We're trying to get the biggest fight we can, and I'm working on a couple of things right now," Kornilov said. Trained in Indio, California as a promotional teammate of light heavyweight champion Dmitry Bivol and former super bantamweight title holder MJ Akhmadaliev, Madrimov is a hellacious puncher whose tales of toughness while enduring brutal conditions in Uzbekistan are legendary. "I'd like to see the top guys fight each other," Kornilov said. When Jermell Charlo was champion, before he lost the super middleweight fight to Canelo Alvarez, the title felt vacant. All of us need to make sure we don't let that happen again. One way to do that is to make sure Fundora is unifying and not just, you know what I mean? Let's fight each other, the champions. That's what the fans want to see. They don't want to see Fundora fighting Tszyu 3 times and then Spence 3 times. Once we do it once, that's enough. Fight another champion. We now know that Sebastian may not return to action until much later on in the year due to the injuries he sustained in the Tim Tszyu fight. Even though he won, he took some lumps.
Busted nose, busted mouth.
He won't be cleared to train until September, I believe it is, which means he likely won't return until what? November? December? So Vadim Kornilov welcomes Terence Crawford into the fray. That's important.
Why?
Because Terence Crawford is the mandatory challenger to the WBO title, and if WBO so decides to hold Sebastian Fundora's feet to the fire since he can't satisfy him within their given deadline, the title could go vacant, at which point a Crawford versus Madrimov fight could be parlayed into a unification match.
Ow!
He'll be fighting one of these 154-pound champions in the near future, Kornilov said. Starting with Madrimov? Anything's possible, Kornilov said. Madrimov will be fighting all the champions, so it'll happen sooner or later. I don't think Madrimov thinks that way, to say he's the best at 154 pounds right now. He'd say, once he wins all the belts, then he's the best of the group.
What are the odds Madrimov gets Crawford in the ring?
Ask Barboza Box, veteran boxing scribe Barboza Box, who says, looking forward to His Excellency Turki Al-Sheikh's first U.S. invasion with Terence Crawford. We all know Bud versus Fundora isn't happening. Not for nothing, Errol was on the ring last Saturday after the fight. I like Crawford versus Bohachuk in L.A. or Vegas for the WBC interim title. Wishful thinking.
What's that got to do with Israel Madrimov?
Barboza Box continued, it's great Terence Crawford has Saudi support. He is definitely the number 2 or number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. Israel Madrimov is emerging as the front runner for his debut at 154. Solid match. Looking forward to it.
Terence Crawford has Saudi support.
According to Barboza Box, he does. Make of that what you will. Between Vadim Kornilov throwing Terence Crawford's name into the hat for a fight with Israel, and what Barboza Box is implying, the fight seems to be a distinct possibility, where initially I thought Israel Madrimov should target the winner of this weekend's fight.
What fight?
The fight between Jack Clarke and Bakram Murtazaliev for what is the newly vacated IBF title.
That fight.
It would seem that Israel Madrimov has yet another option, with Sebastian Fundora, one of the only other champions at this weight decommissioned for the time being. He can target the winner of Clarke versus Murtazaliev or Terence Crawford.
And that's a fantastic fucking fight for what could be fantastic fucking money.
There are very few who have the power, the resources, and finance to make just about any fight happen, more so than the Saudis, more so than His Excellency Turki Al-Sheikh, So if he takes an interest in the career of Terence Crawford, a fight with Israel would be a distinct possibility. In tandem with a sentiment I've always held that the WBO is sympathetic towards the plight of Terence Crawford. They favor him. They like him. So if by some chance behind the scenes, negotiations for a Crawford versus Madrimov fight were happening, that could be parlayed into a unification match for Israel Madrimov's WBA and what could be the newly vacated WBO. Not going to apologize for saying that the less titles that end up on PBC Island, the better. And right now, Sebastian Fundora has two of them. He's got the WBC and the WBO. But if a situation can be arranged where the brown belt changes hands so it can stay in circulation and not in suspended animation while we wait for Sebastian to come back,
It's better.
it's better for everyone. It's better for Terence Crawford. It's better for Israel Madrimov. Better for the division.
For the fans.
Terence Crawford only got to fight once last year, the Errol Spence Jr. fight over the summer months, and waiting out that rematch clause, seeing if Errol Spence Jr. really wanted to go through with it, it costed Terence Crawford a lot of time.
Now it seems like outside of a Spence fight or Spence fights, he's free to roam. He has no further engagement with the PBC.
So he can now go into business with someone else. Theoretically, His Excellency, Mr. Turki Al-Sheikh in Saudi.
Is Israel Madrimov a worthy adversary for Terence Crawford?
I'll say this much. There are easier fighters and even easier champions to make a 154-pound debut against than Israel Madrimov.
Oh, I think Sebastian would be an easier fight for Crawford in spite of his height.
The winner of Murtazalia versus Clarke, I think, would be an easier fight for Terence Crawford. Israel Madrimov, if you've seen him, he's really something. But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. There are a lot of moving parts, and we have to see what develops. In men's heavyweight news, Eddie Hearn wants Johnny Fisher in the mix to face Frazier Clarke and Fabio Wardley. What I was talking about in my previous video, that you have to start paying attention to these young unbeaten guys as they represent the next era of heavyweight boxing. Eddie Hearn stated that nose has caused him, Fabio Wardley, some problems, and he's going to need to get that sorted because he can't go through that with that kind of damage and, well, done to Frazier, who's a lovely guy. And I was straight on the phone to Johnny Fisher. I said, that's the level that I really feel you're at, David Adelaide and those guys, and I want to see Johnny Fisher pushing fights like that because he can provide the same kind of heart, the same kind of energy, and that domestic level British championship can be really exciting and well done to both. Tremendous fight. It was a thriller. While Hearn was enamored by what he had seen, he admitted that such grueling fights come with a price for the boxers down the line. What I saw was a tremendous fight. Back and forward, Hearn said. I guess some people thought Frazier won. Some people thought Fabio won. It was a really good British title fight. It just shows you how good those Lionsdale belt domestic clashes are. We saw it with that fight. We saw it the other week with Frank Warren's show. We saw it with Reese Bellotti and Liam Dillon. Fantastic. Great for the sport. We want those fights.
We do, as fans.
You don't want those fights as a fighter. It's going to take a lot of miles off.
Fabio and Frazier fucked each other up, man.
And this was at domestic level, you understand. Not world level. Not for a world title. Frazier Clarke turned Fabio Wardley's nose into tomato paste, and Fabio Wardley knocked Frazier Clarke on his ass. Knocked him down hard.
Frazier only has a handful of fights, you know.
Well worth its money for the fans, but physically taxing for the fighters. We want those fights. You don't want those fights as a fighter. It's going to take a lot of miles off the clock. Both showed tremendous bravery and heart, but the damage done in those kinds of fights is going to take a lot of miles off the clock of your career.
Well, those are the kinds of fights Eddie says he wants to put Johnny Fisher in.
Truthfully, I think Johnny, who I've seen fight once or twice, he needs a bit more seasoning before he's ready for either one of these two guys, either one. But it all accents what I've been telling you. You think about Moses Ituama, Johnny Fisher, Frazier Clarke, Fabio Wardley, mix in David Adelaide.
He's in there.
Daniel Dubois as well. You can't forget about him. I know that in many ways he's more experienced as a pro than all these aforementioned fighters, but he's very young. So when this era ends and the new one begins, he will be there.
And that tells you where the money's gonna be.
Domestic level, British fights may be all the rage in the next era, more so than world level fights because the Brits spend money. on those fights.
Fights like Clarke versus Wardley.
Now that same Fabio Wardley is considering options for a world title fight over a rematch with Clarke. Fabio Wardley is exploring the option of boxing for a world title instead of a potential rematch with Clarke. Wardley and Clarke fought out one of the best domestic fights in recent times when they collided for the British and Commonwealth heavyweight titles on March 31st. The fight that was labeled Bad Blood had plenty spilled. Both gave everything until the final bell. The three judges scored it a draw. I agreed with them. And a rematch would inevitably prove popular. But Wardley is considering other options.
I would have thought that Ben Shalom and Boxer would have had options on Fabio Wardley.
Moving forward, that he might do one or two more fights with them. Moving forward, I'm not sure that's the situation. Look, I think I'm 6th with the WBO, 10th with the WBA, 15th maybe with the WBC, the 29-year-old said. I'm in the mix for all of them, to be honest. So this is the other question in terms of, obviously, when people ask about the rematch and stuff, the other question is, do I follow those routes? Do I try and track down one of the world titles? The belts are soon to be fragmented. Do I want to position myself into trying to fight for a world title? So I've got options. So we're going to assess and see what's best for me.
Wardley has been a free agent since his separation from Matchroom Boxing and Eddie Hearn.
His former promoter recently suggested Johnny Fisher as an alternative opponent for the defending champion, but Wardley thinks it's too soon. And I do agree with him. I think it's too soon for Johnny Fisher to go in there with Fabio Wardley.
He's not ready for a fight like that.
I think Johnny's a great guy, good friend of mine, and he's got a lot of talent. He's got a lot in him, so he could be in the mix of us, he said. I don't think he's there just yet. I wouldn't like Eddie Hearn to overpush him and push him too far. I think he needs to go through a couple of proper fights, proper tests, be in there with a real competitor, someone with ambition, someone who's really up for it, really game, ready to go, because you don't want to get into the mix with the likes of me and Frazier, who have been through wars, and then you find yourself in the deep end, and it's uncomfortable for you. So someone like Johnny Fisher, still a young lad, there's absolutely no rush to push him. I think he could mix with us, but I think it would be a smarter decision to kind of edge him in a bit.
Then who should he fight?
Fighters that Frazier has fought, fighters that Fabio Wardley has fought, say David Adelaide, Nathan Gorman.
Johnny can fight them.
Remember that Johnny Fisher already has a cult following, a good grassroots following that follows him wherever he fights. Him just being in developmental fights still manages to drum up business, and he does need further time to develop. At only 11-0, I don't think he's ready for Frazier, and I don't think he's ready for Fabio, but down the line, he could be. He needs to be given that time to develop.
And as stated, he, like those aforementioned fighters, represents the next wave, the next era of heavyweights, so long as he can stay in the winner's bracket.
Now, there are some outliers. Other heavyweights from other regions of the world that are in the mix also, like Nigeria's own F.A. Ajagba, the American heavyweights, Jared Anderson, and Richard Torres, Uzbekistan's Bakadir Jambalaya. What separates those heavyweights from the ones based out of the United Kingdom is that those guys don't draw. They're not big draws. Whereas domestic level fights, the UK boxing scene, in and of itself, based on the success of the first fight, Ben Shalom wants to bill a Clarke versus Wardley rematch as a pay-per-view. You think about that, and you think about the other heavyweights, the ones outside of the United Kingdom. Which one of them could you put on pay-per-view?
That's the difference.
That when this era of heavyweights is over, and fighters like Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury, Alexander Usyk, Deontay Wilder, when they're gone, the bubbling market, the bubbling boxing scene for a heavyweight, it may be in the UK, it may still be in the UK, as they have the greatest proliferation of talent right now. Talent that actually moves the needle in that market. Talent that sells. Just in keeping with the theme of all things heavyweight, ex-trainer Manny Robles calls for Andy Ruiz to enter Saudi Arabian heavyweight mix. We haven't seen Andy Ruiz in action since September of 2022. He sat out all of last year. There were talks about him potentially fighting Tyson Fury and potentially fighting Deontay Wilder. In the end, None of that happened.
Was it his fault? Was it theirs? Who really knows?
All we know is that he hasn't fought in well over a year. Robles admits that he has not spoken to or seen Andy in years following their separation. I think he would fight in this Saudi Arabia world title mix, Robles told Talk Sport, but where is Andy? That is the question. I haven't spoken to him or seen him in years. I have no idea what Andy is up to, in all honesty. He should come back and take advantage of this opportunity that has been given to all the heavyweight fighters, the opportunity to fight in Saudi Arabia and get in the mix. With all these great heavyweight champions fighting each other, a loss should not determine a fighter's career. I don't think he should be judged by that defeat. And he's only ever lost to Joseph Parker and Anthony Joshua in their rematch. There's no shame in those losses. Sporting a professional record of 35 wins with just 2 losses, no draws, 22 knockouts, having never been knocked out in 37 professional bouts.
34 years old.
The same age that Anthony Joshua is now, but where is Andy Ruiz? It doesn't look like the PBC has him busy with anything. It seems like their entire heavyweight stable has migrated elsewhere. Deontay Wilder,
Yeah.
Frankie Sanchez.
They're fighting in Saudi.
The last time we saw Charles Martin, it was on a top-ranked show. Adam Kovnowski, I think he just had a fight in Poland. The entire PBC heavyweight stable seems to have dissolved. So I don't get the sense that Andy is all tied up with them, all tied up with the PBC. They don't have him doing anything. So why isn't he in Saudi with the rest of the other noteworthy heavyweights? Surely, if the Saudis can find fights for anyone from Justice Huni to Frankie Sanchez
To Agit Kabayel to Arslanbek Mahmudov, then surely they could find something for Andy to do, someone for Andy to fight. But he needs a tune-up. Maybe that's the problem?
He hasn't fought since September of 2022. And if the pages on the calendar just keep rolling by, he's coming up on 2 years of inactivity. He will be. He's a former champion like Joseph Parker, like Deontay Wilder, like Anthony Joshua. The Saudis could find something, someone.
Somebody for him to fight.
I think he deserves a seat at the table. Andy Ruiz is a capable fighter, a skilled boxer, but I think Andy's problem has always been discipline, staying ready so he doesn't have to get ready. God only knows what he's been doing all this time.
But we know he's not going to be boxing on the undercard for Fury versus Usyk.
There's no mention of him making an appearance on the upcoming Matchroom versus Queensberry show to represent either Matchroom or Queensberry. So what's he gonna do? Saudi's injecting all of this money into the sport, particularly in the heavyweight division. Surely you could get him a Derek Chisora fight or a Deontay Wilder fight. The PBC was supposed to put that together, but rumor has it they couldn't satisfy the fighter's financial demands. Maybe the Saudis can.
Maybe they can pay for Wilder versus Ruiz.
You say it's less than ideal because Andy hasn't fought in such a long time, but think about it. Wilder's on a bounce. He lost his last fight, so it all evens out. The Saudis will pay you. They'll pay you to fight, but not just anybody.
You sure about that? They paid Filip Pekovic to fight Mark Demori.
Maybe you're right. The whole point here is, where is Andy Ruiz? What is he doing? And why is he not in the mix? Because he should be.